Hello, and welcome to this conference hosted by MS Focus, the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation. I'm your host, Deborah Foreman, the Educational Programs Coordinator for MS Focus, and I'm joined by Katy Burgess, who will be talking to us about inflammation, diet, and disease, food solutions. After a presentation from Katy, we'll open it up to your questions and comments. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker. Katy Burgess is a physician assistant in the Clinical Center for Multiple Sclerosis at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. Katy has specialized in the treatment of MS for the past 8 years. In addition to her clinical responsibilities, Katy is involved in several research studies and clinical trials. She has a special interest in diet, exercise, and multidisciplinary care, as she firmly believes that improving one's overall health optimizes opportunities for success in managing MS. Her holistic nutrition certification allows her to better educate her patients on the importance of dietary choices and empower them to make positive health behavior changes. Katy is also the lead author of Enough of the Fear, an insider's guide to understanding, managing, and living well with multiple sclerosis. And she has developed several mobile applications that serve as educational tools for MS patients and their families. We're very, very pleased to have her join us to present this wonderful topic. Katy, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're going to turn this over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited to be here with you guys, and thanks to the MS Foundation for having me. Like mentioned in my bio, health and wellness are my passion, and until recently, these haven't received the attention they deserve within our field. I've seen firsthand how healthy dietary changes positively impact my patients' lives. So I'm excited to share with you guys what I've learned over the past several years. Let me see, did it switch over on y'all's end? It kind of stopped for me a second. Okay, awesome. I want to do a brief overview of MS before we get started. I'm sure most of you guys are very familiar with this information, but I do think it's important to help frame the context of the rest of our discussion. So MS is an inflammatory disorder of the central nervous system, meaning it affects the brain and the spinal cord. And we know it's considered to be immune mediated. So the body's immune system misbehaves and mistakenly attacks healthy cells, creating an inflammatory cascade, which ultimately leads to nerve damage. So while we've learned a lot about MS, especially in the past couple of decades, there's not a single identifiable cause to the disease. A number of emerging theories have linked the effects of environmental exposures and lifestyle choices to the development of MS. MS disease activity, and disease progression. These include vitamin D deficiency, Epstein-Barr virus infection, diet, vaccinations, air pollutants, and chemical exposures. However, it's unknown as to what extent each of these factors play a role. So health behavior changes offer a secondary treatment strategy in addition to our traditional medications. Modifiable risk factors like diet, exercise, alcohol consumption, and smoking are a few target areas for intervention. These are elements in which we all have direct control and have the opportunity to be an active participant in our own self-management, whether that be for MS or for high blood pressure, diabetes, or simply preventing chronic health conditions. For the purpose of this talk, we are going to focus specifically on diet. So I do want to take a second to emphasize that dietary changes and other lifestyle modifications like exercise are not a substitute for medications. A healthy diet works synergistically with disease-modifying therapies as a secondary treatment strategy. So pairing disease-modifying therapies with diet and exercise give us the greatest opportunities for success. In clinic, I'm often asked by patients if they, can simply change their diet and avoid being on medication. And I always recommend utilizing both strategies. And I think patients do best, from my experience, when we handle it that way. So if you were to do a web-based search about diet and MS, you would likely come across variations of these recommendations. Understandably, there's a wide range of dietary advice available on the internet, and each website makes a compelling case for their specific recommendations. However, there is no scientific evidence at this point supporting the use of a single specific diet to manage MS. This is an area of great interest and ongoing research, but where does that leave us? So if you learn nothing else today, please remember that our overall health greatly impacts our neurological health. So while we treat MS specifically with disease-modifying therapies, attention should also be placed on improving the overall health of individuals with MS through healthy diet and exercise. Our time today will be spent discussing how we can improve our dietary choices and the rationale behind these recommendations. So as a society, we tend to eat foods that are highly processed, easy to obtain, and highly addictive. The phrase standard American diet is often abbreviated to the SAD diet, and it's used to describe the stereotypical diet of Americans, which is calorie dense and nutrient poor. It's characterized by processed foods, which are high in calories, high in refined sugars, saturated fats, as well as sodium. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, our food choices do have consequences. So about half of all American adults have one or more preventable chronic disease, and many of these are related to poor quality eating patterns, as well as physical inactivity. So processed foods are detrimental to our health for a variety of reasons, most of which we mentioned on the previous slide. They're overflowing with refined sugars, sodium, and modified fats, which are known to contribute to a number of problems, including obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, and autoimmune diseases. So the typical eating patterns currently consumed by many in the United States do not align with the recommended dietary guidelines. And honestly, in my opinion, the recommended dietary guidelines are not even as healthy as they should be. So as shown in this figure, about 3/4 of the population has an eating pattern that is low in fruit and vegetable consumption. Most Americans exceed the recommendations for added sugars, saturated fats, and sodium. And while many Americans are meeting or exceeding the total grain and total protein food recommendations, many aren't meeting recommendations for subcategories within each of those groups. So when considering our diet or our food intake, I want to differentiate between the two. I don't mean diet in terms of we need to lose weight. I just mean the food that we're consuming. Nutrient content should be our primary focus. If we're eating real, fresh, whole foods, the remaining details become less important. And I'm going to highlight the value of a whole food, plant-based lifestyle. In contrast to the standard American diet, a whole food, plant-based lifestyle is healthy for all people, and this holds especially true for those who have chronic health conditions. So what is a whole food, plant-based lifestyle? It's essentially a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, and unrefined whole grains. Nuts and seeds are recommended in moderation. Oils are used sparingly, and animal products and byproducts are avoided. So you're probably thinking that that sounds like a lot of work. So why would anyone want to eat that way? But we know that vegetarians and vegans are at a reduced risk of certain health conditions, including ischemic heart disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, certain types of cancer, and obesity. So appropriately planned vegetarian, including vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. So how does all of this relate to MS? So that's why we're all here. And I'm gonna focus on inflammation, weight management, and the gut microbiome. So we'll walk through each of those individually. There is increasing evidence to suggest that dietary habits can affect autoimmune diseases like MS by improving inflammation, aiding in weight management, and influencing the gut microbiome. So there are several specific diets that have gained popularity within the MS community over the past decade. Remember the list from the beginning of the presentation. However, there is limited evidence for each specific protocol in terms of how they affect patient outcomes and disease course. Oftentimes diet protocols are highly regimented and have too many rules for people to follow over their lifetime or for long periods of time. So when it comes to dietary changes, I believe that someone's quality of life is also an important factor for sustainable change. And so we'll consider that as well as we walk through these recommendations. So MS is an inflammatory condition, and we know that plant-based foods have anti-inflammatory effects. So plant-based foods like fruits and vegetables have anti-inflammatory potential because they are rich in antioxidants and phytochemicals. But for our purposes, those specific details are not super important because we want to focus on the larger picture. But when it does come to our diet, it's important to remember that no single food ever operates in isolation. So each nutrient that we consume either acts synergistically or in conflict with everything else we ingest. Therefore, a healthful diet rich in fruits and vegetables is likely more beneficial than eliminating very specific food groups or adding a lot of supplements. So, for example, if I'm talking with a patient and they're asking me about a laundry list of 10 supplements because they've heard that X, Y, and Z are great for MS, that may or may not be true. Sometimes I'm not familiar with those supplements and I have to go do my own research. But the reality is if you're eating hamburgers and French fries multiple times a week and following a standard American diet, those supplements aren't going to be able to undo everything that you're consuming otherwise. So our dietary pattern is just really important, and supplements can't fix that, unfortunately. So the next bullet point we had was obesity. So we know that obesity and weight gain is at an all-time high in the United States. More than 2/3 of adults and 1/3 of children and youth are overweight or obese. These high rates of obesity have been present for 2 decades, so it's not going to go anywhere on its own. And aside from contributing to other health conditions, so we know that being overweight makes you prone to heart disease and diabetes, things like that, but it specifically affects MS as well. So obesity itself represents a pro-inflammatory condition characterized by increased expression of inflammatory mediators. So excess fat promotes low-grade systemic inflammation, which can shift the balance between good and bad immune cells. So I tell patients that fat cells are not inert. They signal and can play a big role in how our body functions. So maintaining a healthy weight is really important for MS patients, but it can also be really difficult and troublesome, and the disadvantages are multifactorial. So every extra pound that one carries adds strain to, in many cases, already weak muscles, which makes walking, standing, or transferring in and out of a chair extra challenging. And secondly, it can be more difficult for individuals with MS to lose excess weight because they're limited in their ability to be mobile sometimes and to exercise. And that may be due to heat sensitivity, muscle weakness, pain, or balance difficulties. And weight gain can contribute to fatigue and depression as well. So there are a lot of confounding factors to consider. And then our third bullet point was the gut microbiome. So the bacteria in our gastrointestinal tract is referred to as the gut microbiome. There are trillions of microorganisms that comprise the gut flora, and it represents its own highly complex ecosystem. So these bacteria in our gut have very important roles, which are listed here. They help digest food and help with nutrient absorption. They produce short-chain fatty acids. They synthesize vitamins, metabolize drugs, neutralize toxins. They help maintain our intestinal lining, and they also train our immune system. So in MS and other autoimmune diseases, we're specifically interested in the maturation and the maintenance of our immune system. So like I alluded to, a large portion of our immune system is housed in our intestines. And there's still a lot we don't understand about the correlation between gut bacteria and disease. This is an area that's very relevant in research right now. We do know that healthy gut bacteria support the presence of regulatory immune cells, which work to encourage the balance within our immune system. So these same healthy bacteria also limit the presence of pro-inflammatory immune cells. So individuals with a disease are more likely to have alterations in their gut microbial communities. This is known as intestinal dysbiosis, which we'll talk more about on the next slide. And this dysbiosis may play a role in the development of some diseases, and certain bacterial species that have been associated with inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. So dysbiosis is the shift from healthy bacteria to more harmful bacteria. And we know that certain medications like antibiotics and proton pump inhibitors, those are two well-known medications that can impact our gut flora, as well as stress and diet can contribute to the makeup of these organisms. And we're going to focus on the role of diet specifically. So over a normal lifetime, about 60 tons of food will pass through our gastrointestinal tracts. And our long-term diet influences the structure and the activity of the bacteria residing in the gut. Some diets promote the growth of beneficial microorganisms, while others promote microflora activity that can be more harmful or more pro-inflammatory. So there was an article published in Nature several years back that showed that diet can rapidly and reproducibly alter our gut microbiome, along with other components like fiber, fat, and protein. So Western diets, high in preservatives, animal fat, and refined sugar, promote the growth of microflora that can be harmful, while plant-based foods that are rich in fruits and vegetables and complex carbohydrates like grains and legumes promote the growth of healthy gut bacteria. So since we know that a plant-based diet is healthful, nutritionally adequate, and that it may prevent and even treat certain diseases, you may be wondering why this lifestyle isn't widely pursued. My answer is that it requires a lot of effort, and it's counterculture to everything we've been taught about food, myself included. I didn't get turned on to a plant-based diet until probably 5 or 6 years ago. And at that time, it was pretty foreign to me as well. And I love this quote from The Secret Garden. At first, people refuse to believe that a strange new thing can be done. Then they begin to hope it can be done. Then they see it can be done. Then it is done, and all the world wonders why it was not done centuries ago. So in light of all of that, let's dispel some of the myths surrounding a plant-based lifestyle and discuss some practical ways to incorporate more plants into your diet. So just to be completely transparent, I'm not here to turn everyone into 100% plant-based eater, but we're going to focus on ways that we can just make improvements for the foods that we're already consuming. So listed here are the nutrients of concern that most people who aren't familiar with a plant-based diet worry that they can't get enough of these nutrients. So the top ingredients of concern tend to be protein, vitamin B12, iron, calcium, and omega-3s. So we'll start with protein. This is the one that I probably get asked about the most. How do you get your protein? So why is protein important? It's the major functional and structural component of all of the cells in our body. It's often referred to as the building block for our cells. It's more complex and variable than other energy sources like carbohydrates and fats. And it's fundamental for our function of cells in our organs. So protein deficiency does have adverse effects on our organs. So we want to make sure we're getting enough. So how do we know what we need? So based on a healthy or ideal body weight, the average adult needs 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram per day. So obviously this is just a general recommendation. There's going to be instances in which these needs fluctuate. Athletes who are trying to put on a lot of muscle mass are going to require greater amounts of protein. But most of us aren't in that phase of life. At least I'm not, but I won't speak for the rest of you. So one thing to note, though, is the protein in plant-based foods can be harder to digest due to the fiber content. So in order to compensate for this, many experts do recommend adding an additional 10% of protein to your daily needs. So plant-based sources of protein include soybeans and other soy-based products, lentils or other legumes, nuts and seeds, quinoa, oatmeal. Protein can actually be hidden in a lot of places where we typically don't think that it's there. So here we compare the protein content of a couple plant and animal sources. And as you can see, there's not a large discrepancy between the two. They're pretty equivalent in terms of the amount of protein that they offer per serving. However, I will say when you're looking at the serving size between the two, so a cup of soybeans offers 30 grams of protein, and 3 ounces of meat, poultry, or fish offers anywhere from 20 to 25 grams per serving. However, the average American is probably eating more than 3 ounces of meat, poultry, or fish at their meals. So that's another consideration to kind of factor into the equation. So beans, lentils, and peas are all part of the legume family and are an excellent source of protein. And research has shown that increased consumption of legumes has been associated with decreased mortality in several scientific studies. They're also really versatile, inexpensive, and easy to prepare. And listed here are some other added benefits of plant-based protein from legumes compared to meat. So they're also high in fiber. They're high in the phytochemicals that we were talking about before, as well as antioxidants. They're low in fat and saturated fat, and they're cholesterol free. So omega-3s is another area of concern. Fish and fish oil are the most well-known sources of omega-3 fatty acids. However, they're not the only sources. There are a lot of plant-based sources as well. Land plants like seeds, nuts, and greens are rich in alpha-linolenic acid, which moving forward I'll refer to as ALA because it's less of a mouthful. And sea plants are rich in EPA and DHA. So why do fish and fish oil contain omega-3s? It's because the fish consume the microalgae that's rich in EPA and DHA. So the plants are the original source. So plant-based diets can be low in long-chain omega-3s, EPA and DHA. So EPA and DHA are both types of omega-3s. And this can be due to insufficient intake of ALA. So ALA is converted to both EPA and DHA. So poor conversion of ALA to EPA and DHA can be secondary to insufficient protein intake, high-fat diets, alcohol consumption, smoking, those can all decrease the conversion. So it's important to make sure you're getting enough of the ALA in your diet. So we recommend aiming for 2 to 4 grams daily. And some plant-based sources are listed there. So B12 is something that is absolutely essential to be supplemented for anyone who's vegetarian or vegan, because meat is the primary source of B12. B12 binds to the protein in animal foods. So plants alone are not a reliable source of B12. Vegetarians and vegans are at risk for becoming B12 deficient if they're not taking a supplement or consuming foods that are fortified with B12. So it's recommended that individuals who are vegetarian or vegan supplement with 2,000 micrograms weekly or 100 micrograms daily. So iron is a mineral that's needed for our bodies to produce hemoglobin, which is a component of our red blood cells that carries oxygen to all of our other cells. And meat products are high in iron, but there are also many plant-based foods that are iron-rich as well. The recommended dietary allowance, or RDA, is 8 milligrams for adult males and 18 milligrams for adult females. Plant sources of iron include beans, lentils, leafy greens, quinoa, and soy-based products. And a tidbit, whether you're eating just plants or you're iron deficient for another reason, you can increase the absorption of iron by pairing it with foods that are high in vitamin C. So vitamin C helps improve the absorption in your body. So like iron, magnesium, and copper, calcium is a mineral. It's found in the soil where it's absorbed into the roots of plants. So animals get their calcium by consuming these calcium-rich plants. So even though we've all been taught and conditioned to believe that calcium comes from milk and dairy products, the real source of calcium richness is coming from the earth. So calcium is the most abundant mineral in the body, and the RDA for adults is 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams per day. It's important for bone health, muscle movement, nerve signaling, and the function of our blood vessels. So milk and dairy consumption is not required for adequate calcium intake. High consumption of dairy products is likely to increase the risk of certain cancers, specifically prostate cancers. High dairy consumption does not reduce the risk of fractures, and calcium-rich foods that are plant-based have a variety of advantages over dairy products. They're low in total fat and saturated fat, as well as being rich in other nutrients. And listed here are some plant-based sources of calcium. It's a longer list, so I won't read them all to you. But broccoli, kale, avocado, soybeans, fortified almond milk or soy milk, and almonds are all great options. And this list is by no means comprehensive. So transitioning to a plant-based diet can seem unrealistic and even impossible for many people, which is completely understandable. Conceptually, it's counterculture to everything we've known to be true about food, and it feels very overwhelming, or at least it was for me 5 or 6 years ago when I started down this path. However, our eating patterns can move towards healthier eating habits by making small shifts in our food choices over time. I always emphasize to patients that it's not an all or nothing concept or approach. Small changes over time can have a profound impact. So every food choice matters, and it provides us an opportunity to adapt healthier habits. So you may not want to give up animal products, and that's okay. That's your choice. But instead, maybe try reducing your serving size, aiming for that 3-ounce serving size instead of the 8-ounce serving size, and focus on increasing fruits and vegetables at every meal. And these changes support a healthy body weight, they meet nutrient needs, and they lessen our risk for chronic disease. So how do you transition to a plant-based lifestyle successfully? So this will look different for each person. I've seen many patients, family members, and friends all approach it in different ways, and you have to do what's going to work best for you. But I'll share some practical advice that I have learned from my own experience and theirs. So as mentioned earlier, I live in the Dallas area in Texas, and I've lived in Texas my whole life. It's the land of beef and barbecue. We're not known for being healthy eaters and having lots of fruits and vegetables. So eating plant-based was counterculture for me too. I actually come from a family of cattle ranchers. So this is economically counterculture to everything that my family has known. But I have been eating plant-based for a number of years. When I first met my husband, he thought I was a little bit crazy. When we were first dating, he made it very well known that he was never going to change how he ate or eliminate meat. And slowly over time, he kind of started adapting, and now he eats completely plant-based too. So if he can do it, absolutely anyone can do it. So let's talk about some practical advice. So as you start making these healthy shifts, so whatever that looks like for you, maybe your focus is going to be to incorporate vegetables at lunchtime, because at lunchtime you never have any vegetables. Tell people what you're doing. And in my experience, when people know that you're making changes for your health, regardless of what they are, whether it's diet or exercise or meeting with a counselor, when the people around you, when your support system understands why you're doing that and that you're doing it to improve your health, they're most always very supportive. So share what you're doing with others around you. Invite people to join you in the process. Try to include the entire family or whatever support system you have at home. So I do want to mention this. I know I've said it already, but don't get too caught up on individual nutrients. If you're eating a variety of foods and getting enough calories, you should be getting enough nutrients. Have about a quarter of your plate be made up of fruits, vegetables, protein, and whole grains. And remember, this is a rough estimate, so not every meal has to fit this pattern perfectly. And it's not a diet. So don't worry about restricting calories. Eat when you're hungry. And when you're making healthier food choices, a majority of the time, you don't have to be as worried about the number of calories that you're consuming. Start out by trying this for one meal a week. It doesn't have to be that starting next Monday or tomorrow that you just say, I'm going to do this 100%. Start really small. And once you've conquered doing it one meal a week, try one day a week. We've all heard of meatless Mondays. That's a good starting place too. So whatever your goal is, start with small changes. And if nothing else, at each meal or each snack, simply ask yourself, how can I incorporate more fruits and vegetables into this meal? So this daily dozen is adapted from Dr. Michael Greger. It's a simplified checklist to help ensure that you're getting adequate nutrients and a variety of each. Each box represents a serving. So this can be really helpful for people who are just getting started. It can help give you ideas of things to incorporate as you're trying to make those healthy shifts. Dr. Greger's book, How Not to Die, is a really helpful resource for anyone who is interested in transitioning to a plant-based style diet. So in my opinion, meal planning is the best way to be successful when initiating dietary changes. It is highly individualized, so it's going to look a little bit different for each person. So find what works best for you and your family. I encourage you to get creative and try things that you've never cooked before. Some of my very favorite meals are things that I'd never heard of before, much less tried before I started eating plant-based. So get creative. So meal prep and batch cooking is a huge time saver. Try picking one day a week to prep as much as you can for the upcoming week. Check to see what's on sale at your grocery store and adjust your meal plan accordingly. For example, consider cooking grains like rice or beans in large quantities for the entire week. They're easy to make ahead of time, and it's much easier to do it once and be prepared for the whole week than having to do it multiple times. And listed here are a few questions that I find helpful when it comes to meal planning. I always ask and figure out how many meals I'll need for the week, what produce is in season and or on sale, what do I already have in my fridge, pantry, or freezer? Will I need anything aside from my main meals, like snacks, dressings, etc.? And then will my recipes make enough for multiple meals? I'm a huge fan of leftovers, so I would rather cook a lot at once and eat it for multiple meals. And then can I use some of the same ingredients for multiple meals so I don't feel like I'm buying, 50 different ingredients at the grocery store? So we created a mobile app to help facilitate transitioning to a plant-based lifestyle for our patients. It utilizes daily challenges to keep individuals engaged and on track. It provides education about a plant-based lifestyle, and it offers a built-in meal planner with plant-based recipes, and it also allows you to store your own recipes. So this is a resource. It's not free to download, so do not feel obligated to do so, but it is available, and our patients have told us that it was helpful for them as they were getting started. So sustainable change happens over time. And like I've said several times already, sustainable change rarely happens with an all or nothing mentality. So I recommend taking each day, week, and month at a time. Just focus on the here and now, not what things are going to be like 6 months or a year from now. So try splitting your day in half and focusing on 1 or 2 goals for the morning and 1 or 2 goals for the afternoon and evening. And over time, you can make your goals more challenging. But however you decide to do it, I do recommend writing your plan down. It helps you commit to it. And like I mentioned before, share your plan with those who are close to you. This will help keep you accountable, and it also makes things easier when it comes to social gatherings and dining out. For instance, I frequently have friends who ask me what I can eat, or is this something they're having us over for dinner? Is this something we can eat? Or when we're going out to eat, what restaurants have good menu options for us? So by sharing with others what you're doing, it can help make it easier for you as well. And I think that is my last slide, if we have questions.
That was wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so let's start with questions. Now, I'm going to tell you how to do it in case somebody's not familiar with the system. If you have a question or a comment, you can just raise your hand feature in the app, or you can send your question via chat. To raise your hand, click the screen to pull up the menu, select more, which is that little icon with the 3 dots. You click raise hand. I'll unmute you, then a button will appear on your screen asking you if you want me to unmute you. And of course, you have to say yes. So we don't have, well, we do have one in the chat, but before we get started, I did want to ask you a question, Katy. So I have a relative who is a physician and found out super, super, super fit. I mean, super fit, and eats super healthy, and found out that his cholesterol is astronomical. And so went to like a specialist that deals with that, like the kind of cholesterol that he had, and found out that he could be helped by eating a lot of olive oil. So the guy has become like, and the reason I ask this is because yours said, eat a small amount of oil. So, he's consuming like $60 bottles of olive oil, which I've never even heard of before, but consuming a lot of it. And what do you think about that? I don't know if I should, he's a doctor. I kind of feel like he knows what he's talking about, but yet most people tell you not to consume a lot of oil, even when it is olive oil. So do you have any opinion on that at all?
I do have opinion, but I will say, there are thousands, if not millions of individual circumstances that like come into play when it comes to diet, to where, you know, you can have umbrella recommendations, but for individuals with very specific needs, that's going to look a little bit different. So generally speaking, fats and oils should be avoided. In my opinion, like there was a coconut oil fad for a while where people were just like eating coconut oil. And just because it comes from coconut doesn't mean it's not still fat. So I think in general, limiting any type of unnecessary oil and fat is going to be best for the large population. Not to say that there aren't going to be one-offs where recommendations are different. I'm not personally familiar with that type of high cholesterol. So I'd have to kind of research why the olive oil would help with that. So I'm not exactly sure on that one.
Thank you.
That's interesting. I'll have to go look it up.
We did get an email from someone in advance. Her name is Cheryl, and she said, in multiple sclerosis, recent studies prove intermittent fasting changes gut microbiome and key players that decrease inflammation. Can you give more information for us as MS patients, what we can do on a daily basis to improve our chances of slowing progression of the disease? Which you've talked about a lot of that, but if you have anything else to suggest.
Yeah, I truly believe that increasing fruits and vegetables is like the simplest way to, you know, promote an anti-inflammatory way of eating, as well as just feeling better overall. I have had a lot of patients have great success with intermittent fasting. I'm not specifically familiar with that study she was mentioning, but I know in other disease states, there's been proven value in intermittent fasting. So, you know, eating dinner earlier in the evening and not eating anything else until, you know, at least 12 plus hours later the next morning. So anecdotally, I've had a lot of patients who've paired that with a plant-based style approach where they're eating more fruits and vegetables, and they've been really successful. But I think focusing on the quality of the food that we eat should be the primary concern, and then other adjustments may also be beneficial too.
Thank you. Latoya wants to know, should carbs be considered?
So that's a great question, because a keto diet is really popular, and personally, that's not something that I recommend for our patients. Some data has shown that whatever weight individuals lose on a keto diet, if they don't sustain it over time, they gain back the weight they lost, plus some. So they gain back more weight than what they originally lost. So when you're talking about a plant-based diet and you're focusing on fruits and vegetables and whole grains, you don't have to worry so much about the number of carbohydrates you're consuming, because these foods are also high in fiber and other nutrients that help balance that high carb intake. So if someone's, say, diabetic, this is still a very healthy diet for them to follow.
Okay, Latoya, I don't know if we answered fully your question because your hand is also raised. If that answered your question, you can put your hand down and what? I see. Let's see, who is it that's, I just saw somebody else who was saying something. Paul, no, not Paul. Let's see. For some reason, your name is cut off. Casey, do you see the man who has his hand raised? I can't see his name. He's actually holding his hand up.
Emil Torres is holding his hands up.
Yes. I'm going to ask to unmute you. Go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
Emil, there should be a button on your screen that allows you to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Hi.
Hi, how you doing? I don't have so much a question as I do when you know how I get my vegetables in. I juice them and just drink it. It's not tasty, it's not great, but I get what I need inside my body.
No, I think that's a great approach. The one thing I'll say to that, and I don't know which way you specifically utilize drinking fruits and vegetables. I do recommend using them blended in like a smoothie versus like juicing, because in a smoothie you're, you know, grinding up all the components of the fruits or vegetables and you're getting the bulk of it and the fiber too. But I agree, that's a great way to get a lot of servings in, and
Just get it in your body. Yeah.
it's an easy breakfast. I mean, I even will put oatmeal in my smoothies too, because you get those grains and whatnot, and it keeps you full. So that's awesome.
Nice.
Good.
Good job.
That helped. Great.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go back to Latoya just so we can finish her question because her hand is still raised. So I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, thank you. I just want to first thank Katy for her presentation and just providing such great information in regards to inflammation and diet and gut health. She actually did essentially answer my question. I was speaking from a keto base. I've been doing keto since June of 2019, and I have lost 80 pounds, and it's been pretty sustainable. But I do feel that I am kind of ready to change things and clean up the diet even more. I mean, if I can find ways to further help inflammation and just overall have a better way of life, quality of life, I would like to. So it's helpful to know basically how to kind of incorporate the vegetables and the fruit, and especially the carbs, because these are all things that I've looked at, not as an enemy, but not in a nice light for the last 2 years. So I just wanted to essentially thank her for that.
Wonderful. Yeah, you're so welcome. And I think it's really just important to note across the board that, like I had mentioned, like when you're eating fruits and vegetables, you're getting all sorts of nutrients packed together. And it's easy to fall into the trap of like pursuing vegan junk food or, you know, highly processed vegan food at the grocery store. And so I think making a clear distinction between like the whole real foods versus commercially produced things that are quote unquote vegan. But yeah, I would start small as you transition over, and just you will have to do what feels best for you. And that's not going to look exactly the same for everyone, but hopefully this has been a decent starting point for you as you explore that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Latoya. Thank you. Katy, Beverly wants to know, are all the foods listed under the list of proteins complete proteins, or do they need to be combined with other foods to become complete?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if you read about plant-based proteins, you'll read that no single plant-based protein is a quote unquote complete protein. So I don't think that's something that you need to be hyper focused on or overtly worried about, but that's where making sure you're getting a variety of different foods comes into play. So if you eat a peanut butter sandwich 3 meals a day, every single day, you're not going to be getting adequate nutrients. But if you're trying different things and adding that variety, it shouldn't be an issue. And just to give you a personal example, I like that list that I gave you, the daily dozen. That's like an ideal scenario. I by no means hit all of those every single day. So it doesn't have to be that stringent or where you have to worry about it that much. I'm not wasting away. I'm at a healthy weight. My blood levels in every regard are normal. So try not to be so focused on little things like that. Just focus on variety.
Wonderful. Do Karen, nope, let's see. Irina, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, multiple books on anti-inflammatory diet and MS diet emphasize the importance of low protein diet for MS. Please comment.
Yeah, so I don't specifically know about any data that shows a low protein diet is necessary or specifically beneficial for MS. But I can speak to the fact that going back to that slide I had about protein needs, the large majority of Americans are far exceeding that. And that's not necessarily a beneficial thing. Like the more protein you have doesn't necessarily mean the better off that you are. And so I would tend to agree that like a moderate and or appropriate level of protein is all we need. And I don't know how specifically higher levels of protein is detrimental to MS. I'll have to look that up and see if I can find a study speaking to that. But I would agree that most Americans are far exceeding the recommended daily amount.
Karen, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by do people fast doing this, but she does ask it. She must want to know if people that are fasting still eat this type of diet. She'd like to know also if there's a good book that you recommend.
So yes, if your question is, are people who follow a plant-based lifestyle still doing intermittent fasting? Yes, and that's actually not specifically speaking to MS, but like in terms of preventing cancer, intermittent fasting is recommended in the plant-based medicine world. So the two can be utilized together. I think resource-wise, How Not to Die is a great book. It's user-friendly and pretty easy to read. If you're looking more towards scientific type books, Whole is a great one, as well as the China Study by Dr. Campbell. Forks Over Knives is a great online resource, and it's a documentary as well. If you are interested in watching it, it's available on Netflix for sure. It may be in other places as well.
Great. Casey just wrote in, just as a note, since 2018, MS Focus magazine has a column, Fatigue-Free Foodie, that contains a plant-based recipe in each issue. Find the back issues, and you can look, everybody, to see what that link is. Thanks, Casey.
Yeah, thanks. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. If for anybody that does not already, if that's not already on our list to receive the Focus magazine every quarter, it's free. It's what I consider the most inspirational, educational, and motivational tool that we create. And I know Casey's tired of me hearing that, but it is, and we make some really good stuff. Like we really write fabulous, wonderful tools for all of you. But that for me, I don't have MS and it sits on my coffee table so that anybody that comes in my house has access to it. It's amazing. So if you don't have that, please chat in that you'd like us to send it to you and we'll make sure to get back to you. Or better yet, you can, the email that we sent to you with the link, email back saying that you'd like to be put on the list with your phone number and your address and your full name, and we'll make sure you get on the list. Okay. Susan says, what about lectins in legumes? I had to learn the hard way. So although I agree 100% about beans and legumes being a great source of protein, they can be detrimental. Do you have more sources for protein that aren't legume based? Nuts can be just as bad.
Yeah, that's one of the hard things. And I think from an individual perspective, that's where you have to kind of feel your way through things. It's a little bit of a controversial point too, as to whether or not everyone agrees that those are things that should be avoided. But I do agree certain people feel better when they avoid those foods. And so if that's the case, it is going to be much harder to get adequate protein. So for individuals who are completely avoiding legumes and minimizing nuts and seeds, I would say focus on having smaller portions of animal products and eating higher quality animal products. So, paying more for high quality meat, but eating less of it. And while it's probably still going to be a little bit more expensive, if you're decreasing your serving size, it helps to offset the cost. Or focusing on like fresh caught fish and versus farm raised. So those things can be consumed. and it's not like eating those things is going to be the end of the world if you need to do so.
Wonderful information. Paula wants to know, what about caffeine?
Caffeine, yeah. So I'm not super familiar with data pertaining towards caffeine and MS in terms of how it impacts disease activity or disease progression. I do know so many of our patients suffer from fatigue, and that's by far the worst symptom for a large majority of my patients. So I'm not a stickler when it comes to caffeine recommendations for my patients. You know, it's important for them to make it through the day, and oftentimes that requires caffeine. So personally, my biggest advice for patients is making sure they're counterbalancing their caffeine intake with water intake, because we know that caffeine can dehydrate you. So I think like green tea is a great source of caffeine because it has other benefits too. But caffeine, all in all, I personally don't have a problem with.
Great. Susan says she's seen a lot of studies over the years regarding soy hormone disruption. Also, a lot of American soy is processed using hexane, which causes cancer. What veggies, if any, may be high in protein, or is it just nuts and legumes?
So grains have protein, and not to say that veggies don't too. The protein per volume is just going to be less. So you'll need to consume more of those other foods than you would of legumes or nuts or seeds. But it's not to say it's not available in other places. In terms of the soy data, that's something that is once again controversial in research. For every study you find saying that high levels of soy, is bad, you can find studies saying that it's protective and it's beneficial. So it really depends on where you're looking, and not all studies are reputable. So personally, in terms of soy, I don't have a problem with consuming it. I totally understand that how things are processed is going to be variable based on the manufacturer as well too.
Okay. Nahora wants to say thank you. Thank you so much for all the information. I learned about calcium intake, iron absorption, and omega-3 intake. It was a beautifully organized and colorful presentation. It was awesome. Ha! That was really nice. Beautifully said.
That was very nice. Thank you so much.
Let's see. We have some people with the magazines. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, somebody did say, Irina would like to know if you recommend spirulina as a source of protein.
Actually, of all the things, that's one thing that I do not recommend, and it can be hidden in a lot of different health protein powders. So that's one ingredient that's thought to be related or potentially related to increased MS disease activity. So that's one thing that I would recommend avoiding.
Okay, and I saw that I heard that you mentioned shakes. Somebody's asking specifically, Emil would like to know specifically protein shakes.
Yeah, so protein shakes, I use plant-based protein powder. I think the one that I use is a pea-based protein powder. When I'm trying to make a true protein shake, oftentimes I'll just do bananas, peanut butter, almond milk, ground flaxseed, and oatmeal, and mix it all together, and throw in some greens that get hidden in there too. So a lot of that's personal preference. I do think the protein powder that's plant-based does have a planty taste to it. So not everyone finds it palatable. It may be more of an acquired taste, but you can have healthy smoothies with protein and fruits and vegetables without using protein powder.
Nahora would like to know if you know anything about the book Eating Right for Your Blood Type by Dr. Peter D'Adamo.
I have heard of it, but I cannot speak to it. I have not read it. Sorry.
This is great information. I don't think we have any more questions coming in, so I'm going to say that's all the time we have for now. If you missed any part of this conference, it'll be replayed on msfocusradio.org and available on demand on our MS Focus SoundCloud page or our YouTube page. In about 2 weeks, this will be up, if not sooner, on our YouTube page. So you can all see the slides again at your leisure. If you know anybody that would benefit by that, let them know and they can go in at their leisure and look at it. Remember to follow MS Focus on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for times and access information. Our next teleconference will be this coming Tuesday, April 27th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time. We're going to be featuring the wonderful, if any of you have met her before, I'm sure you love her. She's an MS certified nurse, Sherry Binns, who happens to also be living with MS herself. And of course, she's going to be joined by Cheryl Patterson and Derek Lee, two of our MS Focus's finest associate directors. Their presentation is going to be a little bit different because they're going to be doing a town hall style program where you can ask Sherry general questions about MS or your healthcare, and you can ask Cheryl and Derek about questions regarding MS Focus's programs and services and how they can help you. So our sincere thanks today to all of our attendees for your participation, and especially to Katy, who was kind enough to take the time out of her busy schedule, who also has a young child who was doing this, and to share this information with us, which is just great. It's going to be wonderful content also for people to go back to and look. Goodbye, everybody, and have a wonderful day. We hope to see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.